Well, hello, Internet. Pastor Matt here, clocking in. It has been a couple weeks. I was not feeling well for a while there. But we're back with some more church chat, little midweek opportunity to check in and see what's going on in the world. Kind of just putting it out there that we can chat about whatever is on your mind when it comes to faith, religion, current events, and how we should respond to those current events. It's all good stuff. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm here for, is open and honest conversation. So let's go ahead and jump in. I have a video prepared for us, or I guess a class prepared for us today. You'll see me shifting a bunch of stuff on the desk here. That is because I have not been here in a little while, and I am still getting a little reorganized. So I want to make sure everything is in reach where I can actually use it. All right. Let's see. This is the Bible Project Classroom with Dr. Carmen Ives, and I'm preparing a video on the book of Exodus right now, or I guess a couple chapters in the book of Exodus, and we're going through the Bible. So let's go ahead and we're gonna refresh this. Let's do that. There we go. All right. And we were just finishing up this course on resting in God's provision. And so we'll hear what she has to say to wrap this up, and then we'll kind of look ahead as we are preparing for our next video, which I believe is going to start with Exodus 19. I'll give you a little sneak preview here of our Bible reading plan. Yeah, Exodus 19 to 24, the covenant at Sinai, which is right in the middle of Exodus. So we'll be talking about that a bit in our next video. So we want to learn as much as we can about Exodus, since we're developing that resource. So let's go.
See, the yellow are things that he adds in Deuteronomy that weren't there in Exodus. And the blue is something that's just altogether different. So he said, remember the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath. And then the motivation is expanded. We get specific animals in Deuteronomy, your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals. There's a literary structural reason for that. It creates a sort of symmetry with other additions that are made in the Deuteronomy Decalogue. But he adds, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. So there's more of a humanitarian impulse. And then remember that you were slaves in Egypt.
We're looking at differences right now between Exodus and Deuteronomy, and ways that Moses kind of expands on his instructions. And Exodus is kind of earlier in Moses' lifetime, and Deuteronomy is kind of looking ahead. He repeats a lot of things, but he adds on to it as instructions for the next generation.
I think this kind of hooks back in with our conversation on the liturgy of the Passover and why it's so important that every generation celebrates the Passover every year, so that they see the Exodus as their story. We were slaves in Egypt. We were slaves in Egypt. When we participate in the covenant community, it becomes our story. Those were our ancestors who were enslaved. And because of that enslavement, we are going to live differently. God is saying to this next generation, I didn't want you to be slaves. And a slave works 24/7. A slave's on call 24/7. And I have set up a different rhythm for your community. I want you to have a day off. So make sure you keep the day off. sometimes it's not even our employers that put this burden on us. We just can't stop. We just keep going as though the whole world revolves around us and depends upon us. And if we stop, things will fall apart. That's idolatry. We have got to stop, because stopping recognizes God is on his throne. He's the one who keeps the universe running. It's okay for us to rest. And so rooted in...
I think that's really hard, especially for Americans to understand, because we have such a... like our identities are so built around work, and we derive our value from what we can provide. And so resting is very difficult for us. And understanding that the universe will keep turning, I think it's something that, like, at face value can be like, yeah, of course, scientifically. But also, like, our worlds aren't going to come to a screeching halt because we take a day off once a week.
In the pattern of creation, and rooted in this memory of enslavement and how God wants this to be different now. He says, rest. Make sure you set this day aside. And so again, whether that's for you Saturday or Sunday, whether you garden or don't garden on that day, whatever you choose to do, I think it's really important for all of us to find ways to make the Sabbath different than the rest of the week, and to hit pause and to just rest in God's provision. Such a gift.
That's good.
In our next session, we're going to move away from the Decalogue. We didn't go through all the commands, but we've had a taste of how they work. We're going to turn the page to Exodus 21 and look at the slavery laws.
Ooh, that's going to be a tough one. I'm glad that we're going to dive into that. Because, like I said, we're going to cover, is it to 24? Yeah, 19 to 24. So we'll focus in on 21 in the next session. So let's go next. All right. The slavery laws.
All right, welcome back for another session. In this session, we're going to dig into some specific laws. I have tried to make the case that the law is a gift, that the law is a way that Israel can participate in God's mission. But honestly, when we're reading through the laws in Exodus, some of them really stretch the bounds of what could be missional. Some of the laws seem very objectionable to us. And these are actually, we're going to be focusing on the slavery laws in Exodus 21. These are among the most controversial of the Old Testament laws, and they attracted the most disgust or negative attention. You know, people can easily say, why would you worship a God who allows Israel to keep slaves?
Yeah.
Why would you worship a God who allows the trafficking of females? Like, this is a problem.
Fair question.
And so we're going to read these together. We're going to slow way down and look, verse by verse for these laws, and use it kind of as a case study for what to do when we come to laws that we don't know what to do with. I was asked to do a presentation on the slavery laws in Exodus for a conference in 2020, and so it was May that I was working on this passage. And May 2020, as you may recall, is right after the death of George Floyd. And so the whole world is talking about racism, and I'm digging into these laws that seem kind of racist, or that seem like they are adjacent to racism and problematic in so many ways. And it was an emotional time working through it.
I would not want to be in her shoes for that. That is such a challenge at such an explosive time in American history.
And I just was convinced going into it, if I press in, if I stick with this until I get past the discomfort, because I believe the Bible is the Word of God and that all of it is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, then this has to somehow demonstrate the character of God. If I understand it well enough in its historical context, in its literary context, and wow, I am so excited to show you what I found, because it happened. The longer I spent with it, the more I was like, okay, this is a little different than what I thought. So I want to begin with a quote, and this could have been a quote from any number of people, but Cheryl Kirk Duggan says this about slavery in the Old Testament. She says slavery was bad for the Israelites to experience in Egypt, but acceptable for them to initiate and practice. That's
Double
a
standard.
significant claim that is troubling. And so is she right about this? Is it acceptable for the Israelites to initiate slavery? Is it acceptable for them to practice slavery? It's an important question, not just from a historical perspective, but for today. So we're going to work our way through Exodus 21, verses 2 through 11, sort of piece by piece. And then we're actually going to jump down further in the chapter and look at another example as well. But first, a little bit of a wider angle lens. What is it that we're reading? In chapter 20, we had the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, that run from verse 2 to verse 17. And then we have an account of a theophany. The people saw thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, and they trembled with fear. And then in verse 22, there's a new set of instructions initiated, and scholars call this section from 20:22 all the way through the end of chapter 23. They call it the Covenant Code or the Book of the Covenant. These are additional laws or instructions that God gives Moses at Sinai in the midst of this sort of initial theophany. And their relationship to the Decalogue, I think, is an outworking. The Decalogue provides the covenant stipulations of a more general nature, and then we get more specific. What's the nitty-gritty about how this is going to work out in community life? So let's look first at 21 verse 2 and following. And I have chosen not to translate the word that's sometimes translated slave. In the NIV it says servant. If you buy a Hebrew servant, is what the NIV says. I'm choosing to leave it in its Hebrew form eved so that we can let the text define what it means. And we don't take with it our own preconceived ideas about what a slave or what a servant is. We want to let this cultural context define it for us first. So could I get Chris to read for us? Maybe read from the slide, because that will put us all in the same translation.
If you hire a Hebrew eved, 6 years he shall serve, but in the 7th he may leave freely at no cost. If he came alone, he shall leave alone. If he possessed a wife, his wife may leave with him. If his master gave him a wife, and she bore him sons or daughters, the woman and her offspring will belong to her master, and he shall leave alone. But if the servant insists, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go free, then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door or to the door frame, so his master may pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently.
Okay. So what do you notice about this? What are some things that either are like you notice that are positive, or you notice that like, ooh, I don't think I like that? What stood out to you?
This is actually one of the questions I had written going through Exodus a few times. This is one of the verses that bothered me most, that I felt the most shaken by.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I noticed was that, again, like in a patriarchal society, like he had sons and daughters and a wife, but he was allowed to leave, and then his children and his wife stayed. And I just really want to unpack that, if you can, Carmen.
Yeah, that's tricky.
So one of the things that I think will help us with any law, but especially with these, is not to take them like we're doing and take them out by themselves and look at them without taking into consideration the wider context and all of the other things that we learn about the culture and about the guardrails and boundaries that God sets up. So if this was the only thing...
There really is a lot of that in the Bible where it's like we're so far displaced culturally, but also through language and time and geography and literary style, that we have to do so much work of interpretation of, like, even after the translation, we have to interpret things and put them in their proper cultural context and understanding in order to understand what's actually going on.
If this was the only law we had, it could be really troubling. But taken together with all of the other protections that get put in place, we can see that this is actually intended to prevent exploitation. You can't prevent it entirely, but God is setting things up in such a way that exploitation can't take place. So the taking a step back, we need to ask, why would someone become an Eved in the first place? There are laws against kidnapping, there are laws against slave trade, and so this can't be that. It can't be like, I steal you and then I force you to work for me and you can't leave. This is, there's a contractual agreement.
Yeah, that would be really confusing if they just escaped slavery and now they can own slaves.
If you come to work for me, it would be because you are so destitute that you can no longer provide for your family, you can no longer stay on your land and retain it. And so this is like a social safety net for someone who is like at the point of desperation. You can provide them work, but here are the boundaries around how that work is supposed to be administered or overseen. So it says if he came alone, he shall leave alone. If he brought a wife with him, the wife can leave with him. But if the master gives him a wife, then that means that wife is somebody else who came to work for that master or is a member of his household who is working off a debt of some kind.
Oh, so does that mean then that when he's free to go after at his 7th year, then she still needs to reach that 7th year, is what I'm guessing.
So for the master to provide a wife for this servant, if both of them have come to work for the master in order to pay off a debt they could not pay.
Also, the phrasing is a little strange of like the master providing a wife. I would assume if you were literally there would be much more consent involved. This is probably an example of like a poor, unfortunate translation of the word. The translation is probably accurate, but it's just unfortunate that word provide means something and it carries a weight in English that it probably didn't in Hebrew.
Then getting married doesn't give her a get out of jail free card. Like, she still has to continue to work off her debt before she could go free. I think that's the kind of wider angle lens on it. If the wife is already under contract with this master, then that contract is a separate thing. So marriage doesn't like shorten it. So that's one way of understanding what's going on here.
Maybe permitting would be a better word. I would need to look at the exact Hebrew word that they're referencing here, but I'm wondering if permitting would be a better word. Like, okay, you are both working for me, but I'm going to permit you to get married because you desire to, rather than, oh yes, I'm providing a wife for you here, now you're married.
So is it not permanent?
It's not permanent.
Okay, so she doesn't have to stay with the master with their kids forever.
It's possible. Both readings are possible, but I think if the wife is given to this servant, it means she's not married into the family other than that. Like, this is her marriage. So that means there wouldn't be a reason to keep her permanently in that household. So I'm reading it as the wife is there because she's paying off another debt for her family, but she hadn't been married off. And when we get to the next paragraph, we'll see sort of the boundaries or laws around a female servant.
Oh, okay.
And that will maybe bring that into better focus. Because most women are permanent servants, but the reason is because they marry into the family. And so you can't just like trade her around like a sexual partner that, she's a free-for-all. But the fact that she's being married to the male servant suggests that she's not connected by marriage to the household, which would mean she is free to leave. That's how I'm reading it. And there may be other opinions out there.
It's honestly so helpful, even like having read through Exodus before, to hear all of this from someone who is an expert in Exodus specifically.
other things you observed or questions you have about this paragraph.
It feels like if there's the chance that the servant will insist that I love my master, my wife, and my children, that there's an opportunity for it to be a positive
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
That's part of the clause. Makes it seem like that could happen, that they could
Yes.
love just being there.
And if a master really likes that servant and wants them to stick around, then it would be in the master's best interest to treat them so well that they want to stick around long term, right? So it does seem to be like a positive and voluntary situation. Yeah, it's not coerced.
Do you know if they stayed, if they'd be paid, or is it you're just a servant? In
Yeah,
the sense
so
like we think of a servant.
Yeah, money operated differently in ancient times. Probably like they would have fewer expenses that you need money for. It's more a matter of food and clothing, which you'd produce on your own farm.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we think about the agrarian society, the situation of ancient Israel, when they get in the land is going to be divided up by tribes. So each tribe gets an allotment, each family gets an allotment within that tribal territory. So every family has land. Everyone has land to work. So it would only be the most desperate of situations in which someone could not provide for themselves on that land, that they somehow got into a situation.
I wonder if she's going to get into like the other periods of 7 reset, because every 7 years, like after 7 years, your slaves are meant to go free, but then after every 50 years or 49 years would be the multiple of 7, but 50 years to round it off, that would reset all of the land to its original tribes, I believe.
Where maybe their crops failed and they had debts to pay and they couldn't pay them. It seems like it's only then that they would say, okay, I can't pay you, but I could come work off my debt. And that seems to be what's going on here. And there's a limit on how long that can take. 6 years he shall serve, but in the 7th he may leave freely at no cost. So he doesn't have to buy his freedom. He works it off for 6 years and then he leaves. It's not permanent. So that's among the things I think we need to notice, that this is a voluntary hired worker. This is someone who's coming in willingly. There might be other ways of paying off the debt, but in this case, for whatever reason, working for the master is the best option.
Yeah, reading it in context, I feel like slave is maybe a harsh translation. Because it carries so much baggage in English. And I think a lot of times when Bible scholars and translation committees are choosing the words, it's a struggle, because it's like, how accurate to the literal translation do you want to be? But also, do we sacrifice accuracy to avoid some of the hang-ups and baggage that come with particular words in English?
But he's doing it. So in the NIV it says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, which sounds very much like there's a slave trade going on.
It's
but
probably their debt.
It's just because there's a financial transaction doesn't mean it's slavery, right? Like you have a contract to work for your employer and your employer pays you. It's the same word for pay would be buy. You see what I'm trying to get at? We talk about, maybe to use another example, in sports, managers of teams talk about trading players, but that's not a slave trade. Like when you contract with an athlete to come play for your team and you're offering them a contract, that you're not buying that person, you're giving them a place to play. But we use financial language to describe that, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's like against your will kind of slavery.
That's really
Carmen,
helpful.
can I speak to that
Yeah.
a little bit? So I am really trying to honor this text and to try to put myself in this mindset.
Yeah.
And so are you saying that it was much more resource-based? So is the master doing the wife and sons and daughters a favor because the husband wouldn't be able to provide for them if they were to leave?
Perhaps, perhaps. There could be a variety of situations, but this is trying to regulate how contracts work in this kind of situation. And it's basically at minimum saying getting married does not release the wife from whatever other contractual obligations she had. So that's a separate question. Once she's free to go, they can go together. It doesn't say that, but I think that's implied. Another thing that I think helps me make sense of these laws is to recognize that they're casuistic laws, which means they're if you do this, then do this.
Oh.
This is not issuing God's ideal vision for humanity. This is not saying, here's the society that I imagine that's like the best case scenario. Instead, this is God like regulating a less than ideal situation.
Yeah, I guess in God's perfect world, no one would have difficulty farming the land, kind of like in the Garden of Eden, and no one would go hungry. And so therefore no one would have debt. But that's not what's going on in this scenario. And so it's like, if you're going to put together these contracts, I'm going to make sure that everyone involved, specifically the people who are vulnerable especially, are going to be protected.
If you're in a situation where someone has to work off a debt from somebody else to somebody else, then here's how to make sure that it doesn't become exploitative. So we have a voluntary hired worker, a limited term of service. This is not permanent. The man is free to leave, he's free to marry, and his permanent service is voluntary. If he decides, I'm just not cut out to be a farmer. I just can't see myself being able to make a living on the piece of land that I inherited, then there is the option of staying as a part of the family permanently, but that's by choice. So this is not the slave trade. This is something else. The goal of these laws is to protect the vulnerable from exploitation by the powerful. The one who holds the land, who holds the debt, and others are obligated to him, cannot take advantage of those who are in this unfortunate situation. So now let's move on to the next paragraph, because this one gets even more difficult, because now we're talking about a female amah. It's not the same word, eved, servant. There's a specific term for this female worker, and everything feels wrong about this, reading it as modern readers. So can I have Lauren, can you read us the first paragraph?
Sure. But if a man sells his daughter as an amah, she shall not leave as the male servants leave. If she is troublesome in the eyes of her master, who has claimed her for himself, then he must let her be ransomed. He is not allowed to sell her to foreign people because he broke the agreement with her.
Okay, why is a man selling his daughter? Why is she not allowed to leave? This right off the bat feels really icky to me. And so I had to sit with it a long time to sort of make sense of it. Let's go ahead and do the next paragraph, Lauren.
But if he has claimed her for his son, he must treat her in accordance with daughter's rights. If he takes another wife for himself, he may not reduce her food, clothing, or marital rights. But if he does not give her these three, then she may leave without paying any money.
Is it like a dowry situation? Is that where we're going to go with this?
Okay, do we have any hints of the character of God here? Do we have anything? Is there anything in here that you feel like, okay, well, that helps a little?
Yeah, the part at the end where there's sort of that stipulation of if you change your mind about her, you can't then start to treat her different. She doesn't get to just be cast aside.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then she doesn't owe you anything. She can leave. Which sounds like that sort of protection element of God trying to prevent exploitation.
That's also kind of crazy when it comes to people who take that verse that Jesus says out of context when it comes to divorce. That I believe they hyper focus on the fact that Jesus says that, like, the only reason for divorce is sexual immorality, like cheating on your spouse. But is that the right term? I don't know. I'm blanking on the right term, or on the exact term that was used. But this is saying, even if this is, let's assume that this is a totally consensual marriage. I think we're going to get there in the explanation. But assuming that for now, and assuming that we're going there, then this means that, like, if a woman is being abused, right, reduce her food, clothing, or marital rights, then she can leave. And that's for someone who is potentially indebted. We're gonna kind of still figure that out, but that's interesting.
And abuse.
Yes. Yeah, there seems to be a presumption in this text, although it's not totally explicit, that she is marrying into the family. That she, because it has two options. Either the master claims her for himself, or he claims her for his son. So there seems to be a marriage involved. That might help us with that first line that is so troubling, if a man sells his daughter as an amma. And here we need to put ourselves again in ancient culture. Every marriage was arranged by a father with the prospective husband, and there was always an exchange of wealth between the two families. Like, every marriage included a bride price. And so I think it's important for us to see that there is a financial transaction going on, but that does not make this slavery, because every marriage involved a financial transaction. And that transaction serves to bind the two families to each other. It's them both investing in the future of that relationship and making sure that it lasts, that both families are committed to its success.
Is that kind of like a dowry, or maybe even like a prenup nowadays?
It's like a dowry. So the dowry goes one way and the bride price goes the other way. So the dowry goes with the daughter to the household, and it's meant to support her if something goes wrong. Like, if the marriage doesn't last, then she can live on that. And the bride price goes back to the family just to support them for the loss that they've just had. Like, they've lost a working member of the family. And so there's money usually goes both ways. In this case, because we're dealing with non-ideal situations in which people are experiencing abject poverty, probably what's going on is the man doesn't have a dowry for his daughter, and he can't provide for her anymore. So he is allowing her to join that household, and the master is, frankly, being very generous to accept a wife with no dowry and to give money to the father.
Interesting.
And so this is not like, well, I need just a little side income, let me sell off my daughter. I don't think that's what's going on. I think this is a situation in which the father, presumably, the father can't provide for his daughter, but he still wants her to be married, and he's found someone who's willing to take her in without a dowry. So there's an exchange, not both directions, but one way of wealth.
That's so interesting. Oh my gosh.
And because she's marrying into the family, she shall not leave as the male servants leave. This is not a temporary, like, hey, you can use her for 6 years and then set her loose. Like, this is actually, no, this is different. She's not an eved, she's an amma, which means she's marrying in, and she's not to be traded around from partner to partner.
That's actually, like, in understanding the culture of ancient Israel, that's, I'm going to say, radically feminist for a male-dominated society. Like, that's impressive. Like, that is protecting the rights of the woman who is being married without the dowry. That, like, without that protection, it's ensuring her protection when there is not enough money to give her protection. That's pretty radical for the time.
So if we take into consideration that, like, the context of how marriages worked in ancient times, in ancient Israel, fathers always arranged marriages for their daughters. This is normal. This is the loving thing to do for them. And the bride price is expected. The bride's family expects to receive a bride price. And so the goal here would be to guard against sexual exploitation. If the master is marrying her himself and he ends up not really liking her, he cannot sell her on the slave trade, like to foreign people, because he made an agreement with her. The only option if their marriage falls apart is for her to go back to her family of origin. He must let her be ransomed. And that's what the bride price money is for, is to be able to ransom her back if things just don't work well.
Dang.
But if he said, no, I'm paying the bride price and she's going to be for my son, then he has to treat her not as a household sex slave available for him or for his son or whatever. No, he has to treat her like a daughter.
Yeah.
So she has all the rights and all the dignity of a daughter in the family. She can't be treated as a second-class citizen.
That's some pretty radical protection.
The next phrase is a little bit confusing or a little bit ambiguous. If he takes another wife for himself, is this the master or the son? Is this they were engaged but not married yet, and he chooses a different wife instead? Or is this after they've married, he's now taking on a second wife? I probably would lean toward that latter. Like, he's already married, whoever it is, father or son, is already married to the Amma, and then he takes another wife. This is not the Bible condoning polygamy. It's restraining how that works out in practice.
Yeah.
If a man...
It's almost like acknowledging that it is happening. Like, we acknowledge that it's happening. We don't like it, but here's how you're going to go about it.
Takes a second wife, he can't then just neglect his first wife.
Yeah.
He has to provide for her in all the ways that are expected. So we have food, clothing, marital rights. The Hebrew word there is tricky to translate because it only occurs here. I think it's probably marital rights, as in she has the right to become impregnated so that she can have children. That would be something that's super important to hers, to carry on her family line, and so that she has children to care for her in her old age. So he can't be like, sorry, you're out. He has to give equal time, or I don't know about equal time, but he has to give both of his wives access. Now, there were reasons in ancient culture to have more than one wife. We have all sorts of ways of handling infertility in modern times. They didn't have in vitro fertilization. They didn't have surrogacy in quite the same ways that we do today. So if a woman's husband dies and she hasn't had any children yet, then who is supposed to marry her?
Isn't that that's the story of Ruth, right? The kinsman redeemer.
Yeah, the brother-in-law, the brother of that man. So this could be a situation in which the man takes an Amma, but then his brother-in-law dies and his sister-in-law hasn't had kids yet. So it's his moral responsibility to provide children for her. So that might be one scenario in which polygamy would be the result. But again,
I think she means brother and not brother-in-law. Because you're supposed to take on your brother's wife, that's your sister-in-law. Yeah, that was a little confusing. I think that's what she meant.
And so again, this law is not presenting the ideal scenario, the ideal society. It's trying to say, how do we make sure that this doesn't become exploitative for those who are vulnerable? Questions or comments about that?
Sorry, Christopher.
It seems like the last line of that passage is giving her some kind of agency in deciding whether or not she wants to stay, which feels progressive for this situation.
Yes, again, if he does not give her these three, then she may leave without paying any money. Like, she's not stuck in this household. If she's being treated unfairly, she's allowed to leave, but he's not allowed to sell her to someone else. And so I think that's good news for a woman in a desperate situation in ancient times. Okay, Another thing that I think really helps with this passage that we've just read is to notice where it appears in the literary structure of the Book of the Covenant, because there is kind of an overall logic to it. It might be hard for us to see it, but there's a chiasm, again, here in chapters 20 to 22. So the end of chapter 20 begins with worship regulations. That's kicking off the Book of the Covenant with worship regulations. And then we have these servitude laws that we've just been reading. And then we have neighbor laws in 21:12 through 23 verse 9. And then we have more Sabbath patterns, Sabbath patterns for land and work that seem related to the servitude laws. And then we have more worship regulations. So there's a literary sandwich in which...
So that is, I think, the Exodus 23, I think that is when we talk about the 49 years for the land.
These slavery laws, we might not, like Sabbath might not be the first thing we notice about them when we're first reading through, but if we pay attention to how this literary sandwich works, we can see this is the corresponding section to the part about Sabbath patterns for land and work, which means this text is actually oriented not toward servitude, but toward Sabbath. The whole point is when to release them, not when to take them, but how long do they have to serve and when do they get to go free? So that seems interesting to me. I found that in William Morrow's book, An Introduction to Biblical Law. So that's helpful. And if this was a class on biblical law instead of just on Exodus, we would see in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, when there are similar slavery laws, they are also in a Sabbath section. So God is, whenever he talks about servitude, he's talking about it in the context of setting people free, how to set them free.
That's so good.
When to set them free. And by the time you get to Deuteronomy, Moses is saying, don't just send them away empty-handed, give them gifts. Like, be generous as they go. Give them a severance pay or something as they leave.
Wow. I think that's a good place to stop for now. We're kind of just easing back into things this week, and just want to take it step by step a little bit and not go too crazy. But hey, that was a cool kind of dive into Exodus 21 and some pretty tricky passages. So I think we only covered a handful of passages, but I mean, that just goes to show you how long expertise in something like this takes to read and reread and reread and reread again. Because, I mean, man, the amount of work that she must have had to do to get to this point, and then the amount of times that we have to parse through this in order for us to understand it being taught. Oh, man, that's impressive. But, hey, thank you for hanging out. If you're watching back on the recording as well, thank you for tuning in. Leave a like, subscribe. We got tons of stuff going on throughout the week.